Welcome to Next Generation, the place where the most powerful brand stories come to life. Imagine a world where the phone in your hand didn't exist. No touchscreens, no app store, no sleek glass rectangles that rule your day. Just plastic buttons and clunky screens. And then, one revolutionary device changed everything. This is the untold story of how Apple, and one brilliant vision, turned a struggling company into a trillion-dollar empire. The narrator's voice slows down slightly for effect. Today, when someone says Apple, people think of iPhones, AirPods, MacBooks, and luxury-level technology. But before it became a global icon, it was just a tiny idea born inside a garage in Los Altos, California. Cue soft background music. The story begins. 1976. The seed of an empire long before the iPhone took the world by storm. Apple began as a dream in the mind of a 21-year-old college dropout named Steve Jobs and his tech-savvy friend, Steve Wozniak. In 1976, their office was nothing but a cramped garage at Jobs' family home. No funding, no big investors. Just two young visionaries, a soldering iron, and a belief that personal computers could change the world. Wozniak was the technical wizard, quiet, analytical, and a genius with circuits. Jobs was the dreamer, bold, charismatic, and obsessed with simplicity and design. The combination was electric. The pair began building a machine they called the Apple Wise, a wooden box with a motherboard and keyboard. No fancy screen, no sleek curves. But for the 1970s, it was revolutionary. They didn't just want to make another piece of technology. They wanted to make something people would love to use. A bold beginning. At first, nobody believed in them. Investors laughed. Computer companies thought personal computers were a hobby, not a business. But Jobs had a relentless vision. He convinced a local computer store to buy 50 Apple I units at $500 each. Wozniak built them by hand. They sold out. That moment was the first spark of Apple's future. Within a year, they launched the Apple II, a sleek, colorful computer with an easy-to-use interface. It wasn't just a machine. It was an experience. This product became a hit, turning Apple into a rising star in Silicon Valley. In 1980, Apple went public. It was one of the biggest IPOs since Ford Motor Company. Overnight, Steve Jobs became a millionaire at just 25. Apple was no longer a garage project. It was a growing tech giant. But success has a price. And in Apple's case, it came with internal conflict. 1985, the fall of the founder as Apple grew. Steve Jobs became known not just as a visionary, but also as a demanding, intense leader. He wanted perfection, in design, in function, in every pixel. But not everyone shared his vision. By 1985, power struggles inside the company led to a shocking outcome. Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple. Yes, the very man who founded the company was pushed away from it. For many companies, losing their founder would be the end. But Apple's story was only beginning. Jobs went on to start a new company called Next, while Apple stumbled without him. The late 80s and early 90s were tough years. Apple faced tough competition from IBM and Microsoft. Windows computers dominated offices, while Apple struggled to find its identity. Many thought the company would collapse, but behind the scenes, something was happening that would later change the world forever. Innovation never sleeps. Even when Apple was losing market share, it held on to one key value: design matters. It believed technology shouldn't be ugly or complicated. It should be beautiful, simple, and human. The company invested heavily in user experience. Even when sales were down, it kept making machines that felt premium, even if fewer people bought them. By 1996, Apple was struggling financially. Its product line was messy. Its leadership lacked direction. Wall Street began writing Apple's obituary. And then, one bold move changed everything. Apple bought Next, Steve Jobs' company, for $429 million. More than acquiring technology, Apple brought Jobs home. This moment was like the calm before a massive storm. 1997. The return of Steve Jobs returned not as a founder, but as a savior. The company was nearly bankrupt. Morale was low. Competitors were growing. But Jobs had a plan. A clear, ruthless, visionary plan. He walked into Apple headquarters with his signature black turtleneck and confident smile and began cutting unnecessary products. "Focus," he said. "We don't need 20 products. We need 4 great ones." He made a controversial move. Apple partnered with Microsoft. It shocked fans, but the $150 million investment from Microsoft gave Apple the cash it needed to survive. More importantly, it bought Apple time. Then, in 1998, Apple introduced the iMac, a bright, colorful, all-in-one computer that felt like a piece of art. It wasn't just about specs. It was about making technology desirable. The iMac was a massive success. Apple was back in the game. But Jobs wasn't done. He had something much bigger in mind. A glimpse of the future. Even as Apple regained its footing with computers, Jobs saw a shift coming. He noticed how mobile phones were becoming part of daily life. Most of them were bulky, boring, and clunky. But he believed, what if a phone wasn't just a phone? What if it could be a music player, a camera, a mini computer, and fit right in your hand? This wasn't just a new product idea. It was a new philosophy. Jobs knew that whoever mastered this vision would define the future of technology. He quietly assembled a top-secret team inside Apple's headquarters. Only a handful of people even knew what they were working on. The project was called Project Purple. The mission: create the most beautiful and powerful phone the world had ever seen. iPod. The first step before the iPhone, there was the iPod, the iconic white music player that changed how people listened to songs. In 2001, Apple released it with the promise, 1,000 songs in your pocket. The iPod was sleek, simple, and addictive. It dominated the music industry and made Apple a household name again. But secretly, the iPod was more than a music player. It was training ground for the iPhone. Apple learned how to build great hardware, seamless software, and iconic design. And while competitors were still chasing MP3 players, Jobs was already thinking 2 steps ahead. 2004, the spark becomes fire. By 2004, Apple's secret iPhone team had grown. Engineers, designers, and software developers worked day and night in a locked floor of Apple's campus. Security was so tight that some employees didn't even know what their teammates were working on. They explored different ideas. A phone with a click wheel, like the iPod. A tablet-style device. A touchscreen with no physical buttons. Jobs hated buttons. He believed the future was touch. Apple invested millions to build its own multi-touch technology, something no other phone had at the time. They weren't just trying to make a better phone. They were trying to make the future. Project Purple begins to take shape. The team created hundreds of prototypes. They tested different screen sizes, materials, and interfaces. They built secret labs. They worked with AT&T in total secrecy to prepare for a potential launch. Every detail mattered. The feel of the glass, the weight of the device, the smoothness of scrolling. Jobs was obsessed with perfection, and yet, the world had no idea what was coming. By the end of 2006, Apple was on the edge of launching something that would not just change the company, it would change how billions of people live. The vision that changed everything. Late 1990s and early 2000s were a turbulent but transformative time for Apple. The company had already experienced its near-death moment in the mid-90s, only to rise again when Steve Jobs returned. By 2001, Apple had introduced the iPod, a small, sleek device that allowed people to carry 1,000 songs in their pocket. It wasn't just a product, it was a symbol of cool. Apple was no longer just another computer company. It was becoming a cultural icon. But Jobs wasn't satisfied. He wanted to create something bigger, something that would live at the intersection of technology, art, and human connection. Inside Apple's secretive headquarters in Cupertino, Steve Jobs began pushing the company toward a bold idea. He envisioned a device that combined the power of a computer, the convenience of a phone, and the entertainment of an iPod, all in one. At that time, the idea sounded almost impossible. Phones were clunky, filled with buttons, and had tiny screens. No company had managed to build a true smart device that people actually loved using. But Jobs had a reputation for turning impossible ideas into reality. In 2004, Apple quietly started a project called Project Purple. Only a handful of engineers and designers knew about it. The team worked in a top-secret building with badge-controlled access, blacked-out windows, and strict rules. Even other Apple employees didn't know what was happening inside. Steve Jobs had made one thing clear: this device will change everything. At first, Apple's engineers explored making their own tablet. They were fascinated with the idea of a touchscreen that didn't require a stylus. Johnny Ive, Apple's legendary designer, and his team experimented with different screen technologies, materials, and gestures. But soon, Jobs realized that the market was ripe for a revolutionary phone rather than a tablet. People already carried phones everywhere. If Apple could make the best phone in the world, they could transform an entire industry. This vision pushed Apple's engineering teams to the edge. The problem wasn't just creating a nice-looking phone. Apple needed to build a new kind of user interface, a new kind of operating system, and a new kind of touchscreen technology. Nothing like this existed at the time. They needed the hardware to be powerful but compact. They needed the software to be simple but elegant. They needed the design to be minimalist but iconic. Every part of the iPhone, from its shape to the way you scrolled through contacts, had to feel magical. Meanwhile, the smartphone industry at that time was dominated by companies like BlackBerry, Nokia, and Motorola. They focused on physical keyboards, buttons, and complicated menus. No one believed a phone without a keyboard could work. But Steve Jobs was convinced that the future was multi-touch. He famously said, "If there's going to be a revolution in mobile phones, Apple is going to lead it." Apple invested heavily in R&D to make the multi-touch screen responsive, smooth, and precise. They built a unique technology where your fingers could pinch, zoom, and swipe naturally. For the first time, using a phone would feel intuitive, like touching the future itself. At the same time, Apple was designing iPhone OS, a slimmed-down version of Mac OS that would run on the new device. It had to be powerful enough to handle internet browsing, music, calls, and apps, but lightweight enough to run on mobile hardware. Tension inside Apple's headquarters grew as the team worked day and night. Deadlines were brutal. The screen technology wasn't stable at first. The software crashed constantly. Even Steve Jobs got frustrated during internal demos. But Apple had a unique culture. They didn't give up. When something didn't work, they rebuilt it. When the idea seemed too big, they made it real. One engineer later described those years as the most intense, terrifying, but also the most inspiring time of our lives. By late 2006, Apple had something that looked like a working prototype, a sleek rectangular device with a 3.5-inch glass display, one home button, and a metal frame. It was elegant, futuristic, and unlike anything on the market. But Jobs wasn't ready to reveal it yet. Apple is known for its obsession with perfection. Every detail had to be right. Even the way the screen responded to a swipe, or the sound of a notification. Meanwhile, the world outside was completely unaware of what was coming. Tech journalists were speculating about an Apple phone, but no one knew what it would look like. Some believed it would be just a rebranded Motorola device with iTunes integration. No one expected the level of innovation Apple was about to unleash. In January 2007, at the annual Macworld Conference and Expo, thousands of people gathered in San Francisco. Steve Jobs walked on stage in his trademark black turtleneck, jeans, and sneakers. The air was electric. Jobs was a master storyteller, and that day, he gave what is now considered one of the most legendary product presentations in history. He began by teasing the audience. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. He then explained that Apple was introducing 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator. As the crowd cheered, he repeated the list. Then came the punchline. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. The audience erupted. The iPhone was born. On stage, Jobs demonstrated the iPhone's multi-touch interface, scrolling through music, photos, and contacts with his fingers. He pinched to zoom, swiped effortlessly, and made a call with a single tap. People gasped. Competitors were stunned. No phone had ever worked like this. The iPhone wasn't just a device. It was a paradigm shift. But behind the scenes, Apple's engineers were nervous. The demo unit was fragile. It could easily crash if Jobs pressed the wrong button. They had created a golden path, a sequence of steps he had to follow to avoid software bugs during the presentation. But Jobs, with his usual confidence, made it look flawless. After the keynote, the iPhone dominated global headlines. Tech blogs, magazines, and news networks called it the Jesus phone. People lined up outside Apple stores months before launch. Competitors scrambled to catch up. BlackBerry executives laughed publicly, saying it wouldn't work without a keyboard. Nokia underestimated Apple, but Apple wasn't playing catch-up. It was rewriting the rules. The first iPhone officially went on sale on June 29, 2007. Crowds formed overnight outside Apple stores. Across the US, some people camped for days to be the first to own it. When the doors opened, there was chaos. A kind of consumer frenzy usually reserved for blockbuster movie premieres. The iPhone sold 270,000 units in the first weekend alone. People didn't just buy a phone. They bought into a new way of living. Apple's strategy wasn't just about selling hardware. It was about creating an ecosystem. The iPhone came with iTunes integration, Safari browser, visual voicemail, and a revolutionary capacitive touchscreen. But more importantly, Apple understood that people didn't want complicated menus or ugly designs. They wanted something simple, elegant, and powerful. In the months following the launch, Apple continued to refine the iPhone. Software updates improved performance, more apps were added, battery life got better, and customers fell in love with the device. Analysts predicted that Apple would sell a few million units over several years. Instead, the company would go on to sell hundreds of millions. This was more than just the success of a product. It was the beginning of a cultural shift. The way people communicated, worked, played, traveled, and consumed information was about to change forever, and at the heart of it all was a sleek piece of glass and metal with a single button at the bottom. Apple's competitors realized too late that the ground beneath them had shifted. BlackBerry tried to mimic the iPhone, but failed. Nokia lost its dominance. Motorola faded into history. Apple had changed the game, and the world of mobile technology would never be the same again. But this was only the beginning. The real empire was still being built. Not just with devices, but with ecosystems, innovation, and a vision that refused to settle for ordinary. building the ecosystem. When the first iPhone launched in 2007, it was already a cultural phenomenon. But Steve Jobs and Apple's executive team knew that the real power of the iPhone wasn't just in the device itself. It was in the ecosystem they could build around it. The iPhone wasn't meant to be a one-time product. It was meant to be the center of a digital lifestyle. In the early days, the iPhone came with pre-installed apps like Safari, Mail, Calendar, and Photos. It was revolutionary for its time. But Apple saw something much bigger. People didn't just want to call, text, or browse the web. They wanted their devices to do everything, from entertainment to productivity to education. This led Apple to the most important decision in its mobile history, opening the iPhone to developers around the world. In 2008, just a year after the iPhone's launch, Apple introduced the App Store. It was a simple idea with massive consequences. Instead of Apple building every feature itself, it would allow developers to create their own apps and distribute them directly to users. At the time, many analysts doubted this strategy. They thought mobile apps were just a trend. But Apple had a vision that the iPhone would become a platform, not just a product. The launch of the App Store changed everything. On day one, there were 500 apps. Within a year, there were over 50,000. Developers from every corner of the world rushed to create apps. Small startups became household names overnight. Companies like Instagram, Uber, WhatsApp, and countless others wouldn't exist without this ecosystem. Apple didn't just sell a phone. It created a global digital economy. Apple also made sure to control quality. Every app had to go through a review process to ensure it met Apple's standards for security, design, and user experience. This strict control frustrated some developers, but it also built trust with users. People knew that if they downloaded an app from the App Store, it would work smoothly and securely. This trust became one of Apple's greatest strengths. At the same time, Apple's hardware strategy was evolving rapidly. The original iPhone didn't have 3G, third-party apps, or many modern features, but Apple improved at lightning speed. In 2008, they released the iPhone 3G with faster internet, GPS, and access to the App Store. It was an instant hit. Then came the iPhone 3GS in 2009, faster, more powerful, and with better camera quality. But Apple wasn't just focused on specs. They focused on experience. They wanted every interaction with the iPhone to feel smooth, fast, and magical. That's why they invested heavily in their software updates. Even older iPhone models received new features and updates, keeping users loyal and satisfied. This was very different from most competitors at the time, who abandoned old devices quickly. Apple also began laying the foundation for what would later become one of its most profitable strategies: services. iTunes was already a massive success, allowing users to buy music and sync it with their devices. But the iPhone made iTunes even more powerful. Suddenly, users could buy and download songs directly on their phones. Over time, this expanded into movies, TV shows, podcasts, and eventually Apple Music. While many companies saw the smartphone as just a piece of hardware, Apple saw it as a gateway to an entire world of services. Every new iPhone sold meant millions of potential customers for apps, music, entertainment, and more. This strategy created recurring revenue, something that would help Apple weather future challenges and competition during this period. Steve Jobs also made a bold decision that shocked many. Apple would maintain tight control over the iPhone's design and software, unlike Android, which allowed other companies to use its operating system. Apple kept everything in-house. They built the hardware, software, and services themselves. Critics said this closed ecosystem would limit growth, but Jobs believed the opposite. He believed that control equals quality, and quality would win in the long run, and he was right. By 2010, Apple had sold tens of millions of iPhones. The device had become a status symbol, a fashion statement, and a productivity tool all at once. People lined up for hours, even days, whenever a new model launched. Tech journalists began calling it iPhone fever. Apple's marketing strategy played a huge role in this growth. Unlike many companies that focused on technical specs, Apple focused on emotions. Their ads didn't say 1 GB of RAM or XYZ processor. Instead, they showed people connecting, laughing, working, and living with the iPhone. Their famous tagline, "There's an app for that," became part of everyday conversation. Behind the scenes, Apple's supply chain was becoming a marvel of precision. They worked with Foxconn and other manufacturing partners to build iPhones at massive scale while maintaining top quality. Every year, Apple pushed the limits of production, logistics, and efficiency. Few companies on Earth could match Apple's ability to deliver millions of devices simultaneously across the globe. Another key moment came in 2010, when Apple introduced the iPhone 4. This device set a new standard for smartphone design. It featured a stunning Retina display, a glass front and back, and stainless steel edges. The design was so iconic that even competitors tried to imitate it. People fell in love with how premium it felt in their hands. Apple wasn't just making phones. They were making objects of desire. The iPhone 4 also marked the beginning of Apple's FaceTime feature, a simple, elegant video calling service. Steve Jobs personally demonstrated FaceTime on stage, calling Jony Ive live during the keynote. It was a moment of magic, showing the world how human connection could be transformed through technology. But Apple's journey wasn't without challenges. As demand exploded, critics began raising concerns about the company's manufacturing practices, its closed ecosystem, and its pricing strategy. Competitors like Samsung were rising fast with their Android devices, offering more customization and lower prices. Analysts questioned whether Apple could maintain its dominance. Inside Apple, however, the company remained laser-focused on innovation. They knew that the only way to stay ahead was to keep creating products that people didn't even know they needed yet. Steve Jobs once said, "People don't know what they want until you show it to them." This philosophy drove every product meeting, every design decision, and every launch event. In 2011, Apple faced one of its most emotional moments. Steve Jobs, the visionary who had led Apple's revolution, passed away after a long battle with cancer. The world mourned. Millions of people lit candles outside Apple stores. Competitors, fans, and even critics paid tribute to the man who changed the way the world used technology. Apple was at a crossroads. Many wondered whether the company could continue its magic without its iconic leader. But Jobs had prepared Apple carefully. He had built not just products, but a culture, a way of thinking, a way of designing, a way of obsessing over every detail. He had also handpicked his successor, Tim Cook, a quiet but brilliant operations genius who had turned Apple's supply chain into a masterpiece. Cook wasn't a showman like Jobs, but he was a strategist who could scale Apple to even greater heights. After Steve's passing, many expected Apple to falter. But what happened next would prove that Apple's vision was bigger than any one individual. Under Tim Cook's leadership, Apple continued to evolve the iPhone and expand its ecosystem. Cook focused on growing Apple's reach, making the company more efficient, and turning its already strong business model into something unshakable. By 2012, the iPhone was no longer just a product. It was a global phenomenon. From New York to New Delhi, from Tokyo to Paris, people everywhere were carrying iPhones. It had become a universal symbol of modern life, of style, of connection, and of power. Apple's brand value skyrocketed. Their profits soared, and their influence was unmatched. But the true empire Apple was building went beyond just the iPhone itself. It was about integration, how the iPhone connected seamlessly with the Mac, the iPad, the iPod, and later the Apple Watch. It was about how services like iCloud, iTunes, and the App Store kept people locked into the Apple ecosystem. And once you entered that ecosystem, it was hard to leave. Innovation beyond Steve Jobs. When Steve Jobs passed away in 2011, many believed Apple would never be the same again. Jobs wasn't just the CEO, he was the soul of Apple. But what few outside the company realized was that Jobs had already planted seeds for Apple's future long before his passing. He had built a team of innovators, engineers, designers, and strategists who shared his obsession with excellence. Under Tim Cook, Apple didn't slow down. It accelerated. Tim Cook's leadership style was different. Jobs was a visionary showman who obsessed over every pixel. Cook was a master of operations, calm, precise, and strategic. He wasn't trying to be the next Steve Jobs. He was focused on scaling Apple's empire to heights no one had imagined. His strength lay in expanding Apple globally, making its products more accessible while maintaining premium quality. One of Cook's first big challenges was proving to the world that Apple could still innovate without Jobs. The iPhone 5, launched in 2012, became a turning point. It featured a larger 4-inch screen, a thinner body, and a faster chip. Apple also replaced the old 30-pin connector with the new Lightning connector, signaling its commitment to advancing technology regardless of public resistance. Many criticized the move, but it allowed Apple to evolve faster. The iPhone 5 sold millions in its first weekend. Apple's global supply chain worked like a finely tuned machine. Foxconn and other manufacturing partners built devices at massive scale with unmatched quality. At the same time, Apple expanded its retail footprint worldwide, turning Apple stores into cultural landmarks. These stores weren't just shops. They were experiences. People walked in and felt the Apple philosophy in every detail. Meanwhile, competitors like Samsung, Huawei, and Google were gaining strength. Android phones were becoming more powerful and more affordable. Some analysts predicted Apple would lose its dominance to cheaper devices. But Apple had something others didn't: a deeply loyal customer base and a powerful ecosystem. When someone bought an iPhone, they weren't just buying a phone. They were entering an entire world of seamless integration. Apple doubled down on its ecosystem strategy. They launched iCloud, which made it easy to back up and sync everything across devices. They improved FaceTime and iMessage, creating a communication network that felt effortless. This wasn't just about technology. It was about emotion. People loved how Apple products worked together. The company turned convenience into loyalty. In 2013, Apple introduced the iPhone 5s and the iPhone 5C. The 5s introduced Touch ID, a fingerprint sensor built into the home button. It was fast, secure, and instantly became an industry standard. Other companies rushed to copy it, but Apple's integration made it feel almost magical. The 5C, a colorful and more affordable version, targeted emerging markets and expanded Apple's reach. The real revolution, however, came in 2014 with the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus. Apple finally embraced larger screens, responding to global demand. These devices shattered sales records, pushing Apple to become the most valuable company in the world. For many people, the iPhone 6 was their first smartphone. Its design, smooth curves, and powerful performance set a new benchmark. Tim Cook also took Apple deeper into services and accessories. In 2015, Apple introduced the Apple Watch, marking its expansion into wearable technology. At first, Many doubted the product, but over time, it became a core part of Apple's ecosystem, linking seamlessly with the iPhone. This integration meant customers weren't just buying a device, they were building their own personal tech universe. Another groundbreaking innovation came with the iPhone X in 2017. Apple removed the home button, for the first time, introduced Face ID, and delivered an edge-to-edge OLED display. This was a bold move. Many thought removing the home button would backfire. Instead, it redefined what a modern smartphone should look like. The iPhone X was not just a phone, it was a statement of the future. Face ID was a major technological leap. Apple built custom facial recognition hardware into the notch, scanning users' faces with remarkable accuracy. Unlike many competitors who rushed out facial recognition, Apple focused on security and speed. Millions of users adopted it almost instantly, trusting Apple's privacy standards. This period also saw Apple's services explode in importance. The App Store was generating billions in revenue annually. Apple Music was becoming a serious rival to Spotify. iCloud subscriptions were climbing. Apple Pay transformed the way people made transactions, turning the iPhone into a digital wallet. Apple wasn't just selling phones anymore. It was building a recurring revenue engine. Apple's marketing continued to dominate. Each keynote event became a global spectacle. People from around the world tuned in to watch new products unveiled with precision and drama. Apple ads focused not on specs, but on how the product made life better. The company knew how to make technology feel human, emotional, and aspirational. Behind the scenes, Apple was also investing billions in research and development. They were exploring AR, augmented reality, AI, new chip designs, and sustainability initiatives. Unlike many companies, Apple rarely announced products early. They worked silently until the product was perfect. Then they launched with impact. Tim Cook also led Apple through major geopolitical and economic challenges, trade tensions, global chip shortages, and shifting consumer behavior could have slowed the company down. But Apple's operational excellence kept everything running. Their tight control over supply chains allowed them to navigate crises better than competitors. By the late 2010s, the iPhone had evolved from a luxury item into a necessity for billions. It was no longer just a communication device. It was a camera, a computer, a payment system, a work tool, and a personal entertainment hub. Apple had built something that people couldn't imagine living without, and yet, Apple didn't rest. They continued refining and reinventing. The iPhone 11 and 12 series pushed camera technology to new levels. Apple introduced their own silicon chips for Macs and optimized their mobile processors to lead the industry in performance. Their chips became so efficient that even rivals started benchmarking against them. Apple also leaned heavily into privacy as a core brand value. While other companies relied on advertising and user data, Apple marketed privacy as a fundamental right. Their campaigns, like "What happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone," resonated deeply with users concerned about surveillance and security. This became a major differentiator in the tech industry. Another critical move came with Apple's shift toward environmental responsibility. Under Tim Cook, the company committed to becoming carbon neutral across its entire business by 2030. Apple started using recycled materials, cleaner energy sources, and innovative packaging. This wasn't just good PR. It aligned Apple with the values of its younger, environmentally conscious audience. Meanwhile, competitors kept coming. Samsung with its Galaxy series, Huawei with cutting-edge cameras, Google with pure Android experiences. But Apple's ecosystem, design language, and brand trust gave it a moat that others struggled to cross. Even when competitors offered more specs for less money, millions stayed loyal to Apple. By 2020, Apple's iPhone had not only redefined technology, but it also reshaped industries. App developers built billion-dollar businesses on Apple's platform. Photographers used iPhones to shoot films. Designers, students, doctors, and everyday users relied on iPhones for critical tasks. The iPhone had become a central hub of modern life. And then came one of the most defining moments in Apple's history, the COVID-19 pandemic. The world shut down. Supply chains froze. Economies trembled. Many companies struggled to survive. Apple too faced challenges, but its ecosystem, online services, and operational resilience allowed it to not just survive, but thrive. Demand for iPhones remained strong. Apple stores shifted to online-first strategies. FaceTime and iMessage became lifelines for human connection. This period proved something powerful. Apple was no longer just a tech company. It was a global infrastructure of communication and lifestyle. Its products had become deeply woven into the fabric of modern society. Even during the pandemic, Apple didn't stop innovating. They released the iPhone 12, introducing 5G technology and a sleek new flat-edge design, reminiscent of the iPhone 4. It became one of their best-selling models. The introduction of 5G positioned Apple for the next era of connectivity, ensuring the iPhone remained at the center of technological progress. Through all these years, Apple maintained a simple but powerful formula: premium quality, ecosystem integration, emotional branding, and relentless innovation. And this formula had turned the iPhone into one of the most successful products in human history. Dominating the world stage by 2021, Apple had transformed from a daring innovator into a global empire. The iPhone wasn't just a product anymore. It was the beating heart of Apple's ecosystem. Every year, millions of people waited eagerly for the next iPhone keynote, watching live streams as if they were witnessing a major global event. Apple's stage presentations weren't just product launches. They were cultural moments. The iPhone 13 series was a perfect example of Apple's strategic maturity. While the design didn't drastically change from the iPhone 12, the company focused on refining performance, battery life, and camera technology. Many competitors chased radical changes, but Apple understood something deeper. Consumers valued consistency, reliability, and refinement. Apple had mastered the art of making small improvements feel monumental. One of Apple's biggest strengths during this era was its A-series chips. Unlike competitors who relied on third-party processors, Apple designed its own chips, tightly integrating hardware and software. This gave the iPhone unmatched speed and efficiency. Benchmark after benchmark proved Apple's processors were years ahead of rivals. The iPhone wasn't just smooth. It was powerful enough to replace laptops for many users. And while most companies depended on one-time device sales, Apple was building something more sustainable. Its services ecosystem, subscriptions to iCloud, Apple Music, Apple TV+, Apple Arcade, and the App Store grew exponentially. Apple Pay became mainstream, and Apple Card expanded financial services. Each iPhone sold didn't just represent profit from hardware. It represented a long-term relationship with the customer. The pandemic years also accelerated Apple's role as a connector of people. FaceTime became a household staple, not just for friends and families, but for businesses, classrooms, and even political meetings. Apple adapted FaceTime with new features, making it more versatile and competitive against platforms like Zoom and Google Meet. This deep integration of communication tools made users feel like they couldn't live without their iPhone. But Apple's dominance didn't come without controversy. governments around the world started questioning Apple's App Store policies, accusing the company of monopolistic practices and unfair commissions. Major lawsuits, including one from Epic Games, challenged Apple's control over its ecosystem. Regulators in the EU and the US began investigating the company's business practices. Tim Cook's leadership during this time was calculated and composed. Apple defended its ecosystem fiercely, arguing that its control ensured user safety, privacy, and quality. They made slight adjustments to policies, but stayed firm on their vision. Apple knew its ecosystem was its fortress, and opening it too much could weaken its foundation. Meanwhile, Apple continued to expand its influence globally in emerging markets like India, Brazil, and Southeast Asia. Apple slowly increased its presence through local manufacturing and financing options. While Apple devices were considered premium, the company strategically introduced products like the iPhone SE to capture new demographics without diluting its brand prestige. Apple's marketing machine remained one of the most powerful in the world. Their campaigns focused on creativity, human emotion, and the idea that owning an iPhone wasn't just about technology. It was about belonging to something bigger. They showed artists creating music on iPhones, filmmakers shooting entire movies, students learning, entrepreneurs building businesses, all powered by Apple. At the same time, the iPhone became a symbol of status. In many parts of the world, owning an iPhone was a statement of success. Apple didn't just sell features, it sold identity. This psychological connection gave Apple a unique edge. Even people who didn't need the most advanced features wanted the Apple experience. In 2022, Apple reached a historic milestone. It became the first company in history to hit a $3 trillion market valuation. This number wasn't just financial. It represented the scale of Apple's cultural and economic impact. Few companies had shaped modern life the way Apple had. The iPhone was at the center of this success. Technologically, Apple was still pushing boundaries. The iPhone 14 series introduced even better camera capabilities, satellite connectivity for emergencies, and continued advancements in chip technology. Apple's photonic engine and computational photography made it possible to capture professional-level images with a device that fit in your pocket. The iPhone was now competing not just with other phones, but with professional cameras. Apple also leaned deeper into augmented reality, AR. They developed AR Kit, allowing developers to build immersive experiences directly on the iPhone. From gaming and education to retail and healthcare, AR on iPhone opened new possibilities. This was part of Apple's long-term strategy to transition toward an AR-first world, preparing for future devices like Apple Vision Pro. Another defining pillar of Apple's modern strategy was privacy. As tech giants like Meta and Google faced growing backlash over data collection, Apple doubled down on its privacy. That's iPhone, Campaign. They introduced features like app tracking transparency, giving users more control over their data. This move hurt many advertisers, but strengthened Apple's trust with consumers. It positioned Apple as the good guy in a world increasingly worried about surveillance. But Apple's power also made it a target of criticism. Many accused the company of being too closed, too controlling, and too expensive. Some developers and regulators argued that Apple's policies stifled competition. Others worried about its massive influence over culture and communication. Yet despite these criticisms, Apple continued to grow. Apple's response to criticism was subtle but strategic. They adapted just enough to ease pressure without compromising their core model. For example, they allowed some alternative payment methods in specific markets, made privacy labels more transparent, and increased collaboration with governments. but they never gave up control over their ecosystem. Meanwhile, Apple's retail strategy evolved as well. The Apple Store became less of a sales space and more of a community hub. Through programs like Today at Apple, they offered free creative workshops, coding classes, and live events. These experiences deepened customer loyalty and turned Apple stores into cultural destinations. In 2023, Apple continued to refine its device lineup with the iPhone 15. This version introduced USB-C, faster chips, improved battery life, and enhanced camera technology. Apple also expanded its satellite features, making the iPhone more capable in extreme conditions. The company's focus on subtle but powerful improvements kept it ahead of the competition. Apple's supply chain mastery remained a competitive weapon. Even as global economic pressures mounted, Apple managed to launch products on time, at scale, and with remarkable quality control. They invested heavily in diversifying production away from a single country, ensuring resilience in global crises. Another major pillar of Apple's strategy was environmental responsibility. Apple committed to becoming carbon neutral across its entire supply chain. By 2030, they began using more recycled materials in iPhones, reducing packaging waste, and investing in renewable energy. Environmental stewardship wasn't just a PR move. It aligned with the values of millions of Apple's loyal customers. As Apple entered deeper into the AI and AR era, the iPhone remained its core foundation. Apple didn't rush to be first with new technologies. Instead, they waited until they could perfect the user experience. This patience and precision had always been Apple's strength. Apple also played a major role in reshaping industries. Mobile payments, digital photography, music streaming, AR applications, and app-driven businesses all were revolutionized or accelerated by the iPhone. Small startups and billion-dollar corporations alike built their futures on Apple's platform, even as new competitors emerged, like Chinese smartphone giants and innovative startups. Apple maintained its unshakable position at the top. The secret wasn't just the device itself. It was the brand trust, ecosystem integration, and emotional connection Apple had built over decades. Today, the iPhone is more than just a smartphone. It's a global icon, a cultural force, and the cornerstone of Apple's trillion-dollar empire. It has shaped how we communicate, work, learn, create, and live. From the first iPhone in 2007 to the cutting-edge devices of 2023 and beyond, Apple has shown the world what happens when vision, design, and strategy align perfectly. And this journey isn't over. Apple's future lies in integrating the iPhone with emerging technologies like augmented reality, artificial intelligence, health tech, and spatial computing. If history is any indicator, Apple will continue to shape the next era of human interaction, one innovation at a time. The ecosystem powerhouse. By the mid-2020s, Apple's dominance was not just built on a single product, but on an entire universe of interconnected experiences. The iPhone stood at the center like a digital heartbeat, connecting everything else, from AirPods to Apple Watch, iPad to Mac, Apple TV to HomePod. When Steve Jobs first unveiled the iPhone in 2007, no one could have predicted that one device would become the foundation for an entire ecosystem. But Apple understood something that many others didn't. The real power of technology lies not just in features, but in seamless integration. Apple made sure each product worked better together than apart. If someone bought an iPhone, it naturally led them to consider buying AirPods for wireless audio, an Apple Watch for health and fitness tracking, and maybe an iPad or Mac for productivity. This wasn't accidental. It was careful strategy. The concept of the walled garden became Apple's signature. Unlike Android's open ecosystem, Apple's ecosystem was controlled, polished, and unified. Some critics called it restrictive, but users loved the effortless experience. Handoff, iCloud Sync, AirDrop, continuity camera. These features made everyday tasks smooth and elegant. It was hard to leave Apple once you entered its ecosystem. This ecosystem also created incredible brand loyalty. Apple customers weren't just buyers. They became long-term participants in a digital lifestyle. Studies showed that Apple users had one of the highest brand retention rates in the world. When someone bought their first iPhone, chances were extremely high they'd buy another and stay loyal for years, if not decades. Apple also understood the power of services. By 2023, its services business generated over $80 billion annually. This included the App Store, Apple Music, Apple TV+, Apple Arcade, Apple Fitness+, iCloud, Apple News+, Apple Care, and more. Each of these services tied directly to the iPhone, turning a one-time purchase into a recurring revenue stream. This was a strategic masterstroke. While other smartphone makers relied heavily on hardware margins, Apple built financial stability through services. Even if iPhone sales dipped, service revenue kept growing steadily. This balance made Apple almost crisis-proof, a rare strength in the tech industry. Apple also doubled down on health technology. The iPhone, paired with Apple Watch, became a powerful health companion. From step tracking and heart rate monitoring to ECG, blood oxygen levels, and fall detection, Apple positioned its ecosystem as more than a luxury. It became a tool for well-being. Apple didn't stop there. It collaborated with health institutions and researchers worldwide to create programs that used iPhone data securely and privately to advance medical research. Features like Medical ID, Health Kit, and Research Kit helped turn the iPhone into a personal health hub. Another pillar of Apple's strategy was security and privacy. While many tech giants chased advertising dollars, Apple positioned itself as the company that protected user data. This message resonated globally. Privacy features like Face ID, Touch ID, end-to-end encrypted iMessage, and on-device Siri processing built a sense of trust. In marketing campaigns, Apple didn't just talk about speed and camera megapixels. It emphasized values like security, privacy, creativity, and empowerment. This emotional branding set it apart from rivals. Consumers didn't just buy an iPhone because it was fast. They bought it because it represented something they believed in. Behind the scenes, Apple's supply chain strategy played a huge role in sustaining this empire. Apple had mastered a global network of suppliers and manufacturers, ensuring unmatched quality control. It secured exclusive contracts for advanced components like chips and displays, often leaving competitors scrambling for alternatives when global chip shortages hit. Many companies struggled, but Apple's foresight kept its production lines running. It wasn't luck. It was years of strategic partnerships and investment. Apple had learned from earlier supply chain crises and built resilience into its system. Meanwhile, Apple continued to expand geographically. In markets like India, it invested billions in manufacturing plants, retail stores, and logistics infrastructure. This wasn't just about lowering costs. It was about being closer to customers. Local production also helped Apple navigate import duties and strengthen its market presence. Apple stores, both physical and digital, became essential components of this empire. The physical stores were designed like temples of technology, glass walls, open spaces, and genius bars that made customers feel part of something special. The online store offered seamless buying experiences, personalized configurations, and same-day delivery in many cities. Apple also elevated retail experiences through programs like Today at Apple, where users could attend workshops on photography, coding, design, and music. This made Apple stores more than shopping destinations. They became learning hubs and brand experiences. While the iPhone was central, Apple continued to diversify. The iPad dominated the tablet market. The Apple Watch became the world's most popular smartwatch. AirPods outsold many entire electronics brands on their own. The MacBook line grew stronger with Apple Silicon, proving that Apple wasn't dependent on just one product. Still, the iPhone remained the anchor. All of Apple's products and services flowed through it. It was the gateway to everything else. If someone owned an iPhone, they were far more likely to buy other Apple products. This halo effect turned the iPhone into a powerful sales engine. Apple also ventured deeper into financial services. Apple Pay became one of the most widely used mobile payment systems. Apple Card offered cashback and transparency, while Apple Pay later gave consumers more flexibility. The iPhone transformed into not just a phone, but a digital wallet, an ID card, and in some regions, even a car key and home key. The company's environmental commitments also played a major role in strengthening its brand identity. Apple aimed to be carbon neutral by 2030, pushing suppliers to use renewable energy and recycled materials. The iPhone's components began including more recycled aluminum, rare earth elements, and plastic-free packaging. This wasn't just for PR. Apple knew that sustainability appealed to the values of its younger audience, the same demographic that would shape its future. By aligning technology with environmental responsibility, Apple secured a place not just in the market, but in people's hearts. Another crucial element of Apple's long-term vision was education. Apple's devices were deeply embedded in classrooms, universities, and research institutions worldwide. With features like screen time, parental controls, and learning apps, the iPhone and iPad became powerful learning tools. Apple understood that if young people grew up using its products, they would likely stay in the ecosystem as adults. Apple also played a defining role in shaping culture. Influencers, celebrities, and creators used iPhones not just as tools, but as status symbols. Entire social media aesthetics, from Instagram photography to TikTok trends, were built around iPhone cameras. Apple didn't have to chase trends. It set them. In addition, the iPhone transformed industries far beyond technology. Think about transportation apps like Uber, content creation apps like TikTok and YouTube, delivery services, e-commerce platforms. All of them owe a huge part of their success to the iPhone era. Apple didn't just build a product. It built a platform that empowered other empires. In the corporate world, the iPhone became the standard business device. Its security, simplicity, and reliability made it a favorite among enterprise users. Many Fortune 500 companies standardized on iPhones for their employees, further cementing Apple's dominance. And unlike some tech companies that relied heavily on one charismatic leader, Apple, under Tim Cook, built a stable leadership structure. The company ran like a finely tuned machine, with clear strategy and vision. Cook's emphasis on operational excellence ensured Apple remained strong, even as competitors rose and fell. By 2025, Apple's annual revenue crossed $400 billion, and its market valuation held strong in the multi-trillion-dollar range. The iPhone alone accounted for a massive portion of this revenue. But what truly mattered was the interconnected web of products and services surrounding it. This strategy also gave Apple an unmatched competitive moat. Even if a competitor built a technically superior smartphone, they couldn't easily replicate Apple's ecosystem, brand trust, or emotional connection. Apple's advantage wasn't just technological. It was psychological, cultural, and infrastructural. Apple also anticipated the future of computing. As AI, augmented reality, and wearable technology advanced, the iPhone was positioned as the command center for this next phase. Whether it was controlling an Apple Vision Pro headset, integrating smart home devices, or managing personal data, the iPhone would remain at the core. The company also began laying the groundwork for spatial computing. Apple's AR initiatives, its investment in Vision Pro, and deep integration with iPhone hinted at a future where the phone might control or complement entirely new categories of devices. The beauty of Apple's strategy was evolution, not revolution. They didn't need to shock the world with wild changes every year. They simply refined, perfected, and expanded their ecosystem piece by piece. This made Apple not just a company, but a global institution. The legacy and the future. Apple entered the late 2020s. Its place in history was no longer up for debate. What began as a single daring idea in 2007 had grown into a global economic, cultural, and technological force. The iPhone wasn't just a best-selling product. It was the centerpiece of a trillion-dollar ecosystem. When Steve Jobs first took the stage to reveal the original iPhone, many critics dismissed it. Some claimed it would never succeed without a physical keyboard. Others argued that Apple was stepping into a market dominated by giants like Nokia, BlackBerry, and Motorola. But Apple didn't just enter the market, it rewrote the rules. Over the next 2 decades, the iPhone became one of the most successful products in human history. By 2025, more than 2.3 billion iPhones had been sold worldwide. The iPhone became the standard against which every smartphone was measured, and often fell short. But the story wasn't just about sales figures. It was about influence. The iPhone shaped industries, inspired competitors, and changed how humanity communicates, works, and dreams. It's hard to imagine modern life without it. Messaging, navigation, photography, business, creativity, education, all of it lives inside that sleek rectangle of glass and aluminum. Apple's secret was long-term thinking. Where most companies chase quarterly profits, Apple built a decades-long vision. It understood that real power comes from ecosystems, not individual products. It created a seamless universe where hardware, software, and services work together in harmony. And because of this ecosystem, Apple enjoyed a level of customer loyalty that was almost unheard of. Studies showed that more than 90% of iPhone users plan to stay with Apple. This wasn't just a brand. It was an identity. Apple's marketing mastery also played a crucial role. Its launches became global events, cultural moments that drew millions of live viewers. When Apple revealed a new iPhone, the world paused to watch. Competitors envied not just Apple's product, but its ability to command attention on a global scale. Each keynote was carefully choreographed. The lighting, the stage design, the pacing, the language. Everything was engineered to build excitement. Apple didn't just sell phones. It sold dreams of innovation, elegance, and status. The company also perfected the art of product storytelling. Instead of talking about specs and technical jargon, it talked about what the product enabled people to do. Whether it was capturing family moments, running a business, or exploring creativity, Apple made the iPhone personal. Apple's story is also one of resilience. It faced criticism, lawsuits, and intense competition over the years. Android grew to dominate global market share. Governments challenged Apple on privacy and antitrust issues. Supply chains were strained by pandemics, wars, and economic turbulence. But through it all, Apple stayed steady. Its core values, simplicity, privacy, quality, and user experience never changed. Instead of panicking or imitating others, Apple doubled down on its identity. It refined what it already did best. Another factor in Apple's success was its control over both hardware and software. Unlike many competitors that relied on third-party operating systems or component suppliers, Apple built everything from the chip to the user interface. This vertical integration allowed for unmatched optimization, performance, and security. Apple Silicon, chips designed in-house, became one of the most powerful examples of this strategy. Initially introduced in Macs, the technology later powered iPhones and iPads, delivering lightning-fast performance and energy efficiency. While other companies relied on Qualcomm or MediaTek, Apple owned the entire stack. This deep control allowed Apple to shape its own destinies. It wasn't held hostage by external suppliers or partners. It could innovate on its own terms and at its own pace. Something few companies can claim. But Apple didn't just lead in technology. It led in culture. From fashion runways to Hollywood sets, from social media trends to professional industries, Apple's influence was everywhere. The iPhone became a universal symbol of modernity, like the wristwatch once was. Even Apple's minimalist design language, clean lines, elegant materials, subtle animations, influence countless other industries. From smart home devices to electric cars, traces of Apple's aesthetic could be seen everywhere. Apple didn't just follow trends, it set them. Apple also invested heavily in AI and machine learning, though often in its own subtle, privacy-first way. While other companies made loud announcements, Apple quietly embedded AI across the ecosystem. In Siri, in Photos, in predictive typing, in accessibility features, and in the way the iPhone adapted to its user. The future Apple envisioned wasn't about replacing humans with machines. It was about augmenting human ability, making technology invisible yet powerful, always there when needed, never in the way. Sustainability continued to be a pillar of Apple's identity. It pushed for 100% recycled materials, carbon neutrality, and energy-efficient manufacturing. It wasn't just a corporate responsibility. It was part of the brand's promise. Apple's ability to tie environmental values with cutting-edge technology gave it a unique moral edge in the market. Another underappreciated part of Apple's empire was its App Store ecosystem. Since its launch in 2008, the App Store had paid out hundreds of billions of dollars to developers worldwide. It created entire industries, from mobile gaming to fintech to fitness apps. The iPhone became a platform for innovation, enabling others to build empires on top of Apple's foundation. Apple understood something simple but profound. The more people could do with their iPhone, the more valuable it became. Every app downloaded, every feature added, every accessory integrated. It all deepened the bond between user and device. The company also became a major force in financial services. Apple Pay, Apple Card, and Apple Pay Later weren't just side projects. They turned the iPhone into a financial hub, replacing wallets, credit cards, and even physical IDs in many places. This further cemented Apple's grip on daily life. One of Apple's greatest strengths was its ability to stay relevant without losing its core identity. Many companies age out of culture. They become stale or disconnected. Apple avoided this fate by constantly evolving, not chasing trends blindly, but adapting them on Apple's terms. Its focus on design, simplicity, and elegance remained unchanged. Whether it was the iPhone 4 or the iPhone 15, there was always something unmistakably Apple about it. This timeless design philosophy gave the brand a sense of prestige. By this stage, Apple had reached a point where entire industries depended on it. Accessories, apps, content creators, retail networks, marketing agencies, logistics companies, all thrived around the Apple ecosystem. Apple wasn't just a company anymore. It was infrastructure. Culturally, Apple became a symbol of ambition and success. For creators, it was a tool. For entrepreneurs, it was a platform. For everyday users, it was a digital companion. The iPhone was both luxury and necessity, something few products in history had achieved. The company's financial performance was equally staggering, with annual revenues surpassing $400 billion and profit margins most rivals could only dream of. Apple maintained its place as one of the most valuable companies on Earth. Its stock became a favorite of investors worldwide, representing stability and growth. More importantly, Apple became a trustworthy brand. In an age where tech giants face skepticism, Apple stood out as a company that championed user experience and privacy over reckless data exploitation. Whether one agreed with every Apple decision or not, its principles were clear. And while Apple's leadership changed over the decades, its DNA remained intact. From Steve Jobs' bold vision to Tim Cook's operational excellence, Apple's story was one of vision, precision, and evolution. The iPhone's impact stretched far beyond technology. It changed how people connect, how they create, how they work, how they navigate, and even how they see themselves. It blurred the lines between the digital and physical worlds. It didn't just connect people to the internet, it connected them to each other. Apple didn't invent the smartphone, but it perfected the idea. It transformed a device into a cultural artifact, an economic powerhouse, and a technological marvel. It built not just a product, but a legacy. And as Apple looked to the future, into AR, AI, health tech, sustainability, and new forms of computing, one thing remained clear. The iPhone was not just the beginning, it was the foundation of something even greater. Someday, new technologies may surpass the iPhone, but its influence will never fade. Just like the printing press changed how humans shared knowledge, or the light bulb changed how humans lived at night, the iPhone changed how humans experience the world. Apple's trillion-dollar empire isn't just built on aluminum and silicon. It's built on ideas, vision, precision, and the ability to make technology human. And it all started with one unforgettable line on January 9th, 2007. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.